Rain slicked the cracked asphalt, turning the alley into a mirror of the stormy sky. I was halfway down the block when I first heard it, a trembling, desperate chorus of tiny whines, almost drowned beneath the roar of the evening downpour. My boots splashed through puddles, heart tightening with every step, and then I saw them, 8 little bodies huddled under a battered cardboard box, soaked, shivering, eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope that felt impossibly fragile. Their fur, a muddy mix of gray and brown, clung to their spines like wet silk, and one of them, a tiny shepherd puppy with a crooked ear, let out a small, almost human sigh, as if acknowledging the danger around them. The air smelled of rain, wet cement, and the faint tang of fear. I knelt, letting the water run over my hands as I reached in, and their little faces pressed against my fingers, trembling, trusting. Every instinct screamed urgency. Someone had abandoned them, and time was already against their fragile, beating hearts. In that moment, everything else dissolved. It was just us, the storm, and the impossible choice to save them all. Rain hammered the cracked asphalt, a relentless rhythm that filled the empty alley with a metallic roar. The streetlights flickered weakly, struggling to pierce the gray haze of the storm, and the wind whipped down the narrow corridor between abandoned warehouses, carrying the smell of wet concrete, rot, and distant smoke. I had been walking home, boots squelching through the puddles, shoulders hunched against the cold when I first heard it, a chorus so faint it almost didn't register, buried beneath the cacophony of the rain. Then it came again, sharper, insistent, a fragile, trembling sound, the kind that made the chest ache with sudden urgency. Whines, high-pitched, quivering, and desperate, my heart skipped. Something alive, something small, something in need of me was calling through the storm. I followed the sound down the narrow alley, each step slower than the last, a mix of dread and hope twisting in my chest. And then I saw them, 8 tiny bodies, shivering and sodden, huddled under a battered cardboard box that had been pressed into the ground by puddles and wind. Their coats were matted with mud, clinging to ribs too thin, tails tucked beneath trembling frames. I knelt instinctively, the rain soaking my sleeves, and the world narrowed to their little faces, eyes wide, glimmering with fear, confusion, and the faintest glimmer of trust. One, smaller than the rest, craned a crooked ear in my direction, as if measuring the danger I represented. Its whine was quieter, almost human, a sigh that sank into my bones. The rain had soaked their smell into the alley, a mixture of wet fur, earth, and fear that hung heavy in the air. My fingers hovered above them, hesitating for just a heartbeat, because the wrong move could send them scattering, vanishing into the dark streets and the storm. But the moment stretched, fragile and electric, and I slowly reached forward. One by one their tiny noses twitched, sniffing the air, their whines slowing, curiosity breaking through instinctual terror. The smallest puppy stepped forward, paws slipping in the mud, and pressed against my hand, shivering so violently it made my chest ache. My palm cradled its wet body, warmth seeping into cold bones, and I felt it, the fragile, urgent pulse of life fighting against abandonment, against the storm, against a world that had turned away from them. I looked down at the others. Each reacted differently. One whimpered and tried to hide further under the box. Another froze, ears flat, eyes wide and unblinking. A third sniffed the rain-soaked ground, as if testing whether it was safe to trust me. The smallest one, still pressed into my hand, trembled so hard I had to cup it with both palms. Every instinct in me screamed, "Don't let the storm take them. Don't let them disappear into the night and never be seen again." I tore a piece of my soaked jacket and carefully draped it over the trembling pile, a makeshift shelter against the rain, and began moving them gently, slowly, as if the wrong motion could shatter their fragile courage. Their tiny bodies were heavier than I expected, weighted with hunger, cold, and fear, but even the struggle to hold them all at once felt sacred. I could feel their little hearts hammering against my palms, little pulses of life that demanded protection. Each whine was a plea, each shiver a reminder that time was already against them. The storm raged on, water running down the alley in silver rivulets, but here, in this small, muddy corner, a different kind of storm existed, the one within me, the mix of terror, hope, and determination that I could not leave them behind. I crouched lower, speaking softly to them, my words drowned beneath the rain but somehow audible in the small, intimate space we shared. "It's okay," I whispered, voice trembling. "I've got you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The smallest one tilted its head, ears flopping, sniffing my words like they carried warmth. Slowly, one by one, the others emerged from under the cardboard, tentative paws slipping on wet asphalt, fur clinging to ribs, eyes wide and uncertain. They weren't just scared, they were calculating, weighing whether this strange human was danger or salvation, and in that moment, every choice, every movement, every drop of rain mattered. I started gathering them, one tiny body at a time. The mud stuck to my sleeves, the rain ran in rivulets down my neck, and every time a puppy whimpered or froze in panic, my heart tightened. But each time they leaned into my hands or nudged me with wet little noses, I felt a thread of trust weaving itself between us, delicate and irreplaceable. By the time all 8 were safely in my arms, I was soaked through, chest aching and trembling, not from the cold but from the enormity of the responsibility I had just assumed. These tiny lives, abandoned by everyone else, were now my responsibility. Their survival depended on me. I stood under the flickering light of a broken street lamp, holding them against my chest, and for a long moment, the world outside the alley, the storm, the empty streets, the distant sirens ceased to exist. There was only the sound of 8 tiny breaths against my soaked shirt, 8 little hearts beating in unison, and the realization that they had chosen me, in the way that only the vulnerable can choose, with no words, only instinct, and I had chosen them back, without hesitation, without question. As I walked toward the warmth of the car, each step careful, balancing wet paws and tiny shivering bodies, I felt the weight of the storm both outside and inside me. Outside, the rain washed the streets, turning the city into a blur of gray and silver. Inside, my chest was full of a new piercing kind of hope, the kind that only arrives after witnessing fragility so profound it could break your soul if you let it. 8 tiny German Shepherd puppies, abandoned, shivering, forgotten, yet alive and now cradled against my heart. The storm had not ended, and the world had not yet forgiven them for its neglect. But here, in this moment, under the downpour, holding 8 fragile lives in my arms, there was a promise. No matter how long it took, no matter how difficult the journey, they would not be forgotten again. And as I drove through the rain-slicked streets toward a place that could finally shelter them, I realized something I hadn't expected. Their trust was not just a gift, it was a lifeline, and in giving it, I had already begun to change. The moment the car door closed, sealing us away from the relentless rain, the puppies finally seemed to understand they were out of immediate danger. Their tiny paws scrabbled against the seat, wet and slick, and the soft whines persisted, but now tinged with something softer, curiosity maybe, or the first hints of trust. I wrapped each trembling little body in a warm towel, the scent of cotton mingling with the damp fur and faint musky odor of fear. One of them, the smallest shepherd with the crooked ear, nestled against my chest, its head tilting as if listening to my heartbeat, measuring whether it was steady, safe, familiar. The rain still drummed on the roof, a muted percussion that felt less threatening inside, more like a lullaby coaxing fragile courage into life. The first challenge was feeding them. 8 tiny mouths, teeth barely formed, squeaked and nipped at the formula bottle, competing in frantic, awkward desperation. Some gagged, some refused, their bodies trembling from exhaustion, and each struggle set my nerves on edge. I cleaned, comforted, and coaxed, murmuring reassurances I didn't know they could understand. Yet as each swallow passed, each tiny gulp of warmth and sustenance, I saw the faintest relief flicker across their small, mud-streaked faces. For a moment, I could almost see the layers of neglect peeling away, replaced with something fragile and new, the recognition that hands could hold, not hurt, that warmth could arrive after cold, that a human could be the beginning of safety rather than fear. They slept in shifts that night, curled together in a heap of wet fur and trembling limbs on the towels I had laid out in the corner. The smallest one, still pressed to my chest, twitched in dreams, paws paddling the air as if chasing something it had long forgotten. The rain outside slowed to a whisper, pattering against the window pane, echoing the soft breathing of 8 fragile lives. I sat beside them, hand resting on their collective warmth, listening to each tiny heartbeat, and wondering how anyone could have walked past this alley without stopping. Anger and sorrow coiled in my stomach, but there was also awe, how resilient life could be, how even the most broken could cling so desperately to survival. Morning arrived with a timid gray light filtering through the thin curtains of my makeshift shelter. The puppies stirred, bleary-eyed, paws slipping against the towels as they began to explore their small, temporary world. Some ventured further than others, noses quivering, sniffing unfamiliar textures, sounds, and smells. One bold little shepherd leapt awkwardly onto the edge of a box, tumbling back into a heap of squeals and fur. Another remained huddled in the corner, trembling, hesitant, eyes tracking every movement I made. I spoke softly to them, voice low and warm, letting them know the boundaries of safety, this small room, these human hands, these towels that could cradle instead of hurt. As the hours passed, small victories accumulated like fragile sparks in a dark room. The boldest puppy learned to drink from a shallow bowl unaided, tail wagging with the first flickers of pride. The timid one, after many failed attempts, finally edged toward me, sniffing my fingers, then pressing its damp little body into my hands, shivering less, trusting more. I marveled at the subtleties of connection, how a nuzzle, a lick, a hesitant paw could carry volumes of gratitude, suspicion, and cautious love all at once. I could feel their trust grow in the space between them and me, a delicate thread stretching tighter with every gentle gesture, yet trust was uneven, fragile, and easily threatened. A sudden noise, a car horn, a door slamming, sent the boldest puppy skidding into the corner, eyes wide and round, body trembling. The others tensed, huddling together, tails tucked. I froze too, realizing that even in the safety of a warm room, the ghosts of abandonment followed them like shadows. Kneeling slowly, voice soft but firm, I extended a hand. One by one the hesitant paws crept toward me, testing the promise of safety, seeking reassurance that the human presence could be something more than fear. Each touch, each tentative nuzzle, was a small miracle, a fragile step toward healing. By evening the room was filled with the quiet hum of contentment, broken only by the occasional sigh or playful squeak as they explored their tiny sanctuary. The smallest shepherd curled in my lap, eyes half closed, trust fully surrendered, while others sprawled in awkward heaps, slowly shedding layers of tension that had accumulated over weeks, perhaps months of neglect. I studied them, memorizing their quirks, the tilt of a head, the lift of a paw, the subtle tremble in a shoulder, and felt a connection deeper than words could convey. It was a responsibility, yes, but also an honor, to witness recovery, to hold the fragile sparks of life in my hands, to coax hope into their small, wary hearts. Night fell again, but this time the storm was only a memory outside the walls. The puppies nestled against each other, a living quilt of fur and warmth, and I sat with my arms wrapped around them, letting exhaustion and relief wash through me. I thought about the street, the cardboard box, the cold rain, and the impossible choice that had landed them in my care. The memory still made my chest tighten, but it was accompanied now by a quieter, fiercer determination. They had survived the night, and they would survive the next, and the one after, because hands that held hope could reshape the world, even in its smallest, most vulnerable corners. I stayed until their breathing evened out, until the soft rhythm of 8 tiny lives filled the room like a fragile symphony, and as I finally leaned back against the wall, soaked through from the first night but dry in spirit, I understood something profoundly simple. Rescue is not a single act. It is patience, it is repetition, it is every touch, every whisper, every moment of unwavering attention that tells the broken that they can be whole again. And in that room, amid the warmth of 8 little German shepherd puppies finding their first taste of trust, I felt the first true, undeniable pulse of something eternal, the beginning of hope that could not be washed away. Morning spilled through the thin curtains like gold dust, soft and tentative, coaxing the 8 little shepherds from the warmth of their towels and into the fragile, trembling light of a world that had once ignored them. They emerged slowly, paws slipping on the smooth floor, noses twitching at the scent of something safe, something warm, something that whispered possibility. Each step was careful, measured, a negotiation between fear and curiosity. I watched them, heart tight, breath shallow, knowing that these movements, tiny, trembling, awkward, were monumental. Every wobble of a paw, every hesitant sniff of the floor, was a testament to resilience, to life stubbornly pushing forward despite the shadow of abandonment. The smallest one, the crooked-eared shepherd, led the charge. With legs still spindly from weeks of neglect, it padded cautiously toward a shallow dish of food, nose dipping and sniffing before daring a tentative lick. Its siblings watched, unsure, some retreating to the corners, others circling, measuring whether the human hands that had rescued them could be trusted not to hurt again. The air smelled of wet fur, warm milk, and the faint tang of anxiety, yet beneath it all was something else, an invisible pulse of hope, delicate but persistent, threading through the room like sunlight between clouds. Exploration became a game, a negotiation, a lesson in courage. A bold shepherd leapt onto a small pile of blankets, tumbling with an awkward squeak, then shaking itself as if to defy the fear of falling. Another crawled over its siblings, tentative paws pressing down the weight of uncertainty, until curiosity outweighed caution, and it ventured closer to me, sniffing at my hands, then daring a nuzzle. I spoke softly, my voice a gentle rhythm in the room, letting them know that stumbling was safe, falling was forgiven, and curiosity was celebrated. Every flick of a tail, every ear twitch, every small squeak of delight was an achievement. Tiny victories in a slow, delicate journey toward reclaiming life. Play became education. I watched as they discovered the boundaries of their small world, the corners, the blankets, the shallow boxes set up as obstacles to climb. One clumsily attempted to scale a towel draped over a chair leg, landing in a heap of fur and squeals. Its siblings rushed to investigate, noses bumping, tails wagging, eyes wide with both concern and fascination. Each movement, no matter how awkward, carried the imprint of survival, muscles unused, bones untested, hearts still fragile. I felt the ache of memory in their trembling limbs, but also the thrill of first successes, watching life bloom slowly in tiny cautious increments. I cleaned scraped knees and mud-streaked faces with gentle hands, murmuring reassurances, letting them taste patience in touch, trust in routine. Feeding became more than nourishment, it was an exchange of faith. Each puppy learned to lap milk without spilling, learned to chew gently without fear, learned the rhythm of human hands guiding rather than harming. They began to vocalize differently. Soft whines of hunger were replaced by contented sighs, fearful whimpers by squeaks of tentative joy. The smallest shepherd's crooked ear would twitch in curiosity instead of alarm, signaling the first signs of emotional healing. The days passed in a careful choreography of growth. I introduced new textures, blankets of different weaves, shallow pools of water to splash in, cardboard towers to climb, watching each puppy measure the risk, retreat, and then try again. Their personalities began to emerge with stark clarity, the bold, the timid, the playful, the cautious. I could predict the crooked-eared shepherd's steps before it moved, anticipate the timid one's hesitation, laugh at the boundless energy of the smallest mischief-maker who crashed into blankets and siblings alike. With each discovery, each misstep, each moment of courage, they reclaimed fragments of the life that had been denied to them. Yet growth was never linear. Night times brought challenges. The smallest noises, a creaking floorboard, the hum of the heater, could trigger trembling and huddling, a relapse into fear. I stayed awake listening to soft whimpers, gently lifting bodies, murmuring, wrapping warmth around them until their breathing evened and they learned once again that the world could be safe. I realized that healing was not a single moment, but a continuum of patience, an endless series of tiny affirmations that trust could exist even after betrayal. One afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling golden light onto the small room, turning dust motes into drifting sparks of hope. I set out a shallow tray of water for the first time, and the puppies approached cautiously, noses quivering, tails stiff with uncertainty. One tentative paw touched the water, recoiling, then touched again, then a head dipped, drinking, splashing, and finally joyfully, the boldest leapt, shaking water droplets like tiny fireworks. Laughter soft, irrepressible, human laughter escaped me as I watched the timid ones mimic the movements, eventually daring to splash, learning that fear could give way to joy, even in small increments. Evenings became quieter, filled with gentle exploration and soft bonding. I would sit among them, letting their paws knead into my lap, their noses nudge my hands, their warmth press into me like a living quilt. I memorized each tilt of a head, each blink, each subtle gesture of emotion. Trust grew in the spaces between words, in pauses, in the tilt of an ear, in the brush of a paw. It was an invisible thread, strengthening, weaving a tapestry of dependence, connection, and cautious hope. By the end of the week, the transformation was subtle but undeniable. The boldest no longer flinched at sudden movement. The timidest ventured into the open, sniffing the edges of the room with tentative curiosity. The smallest crooked-eared shepherd had begun to explore independently, returning to my lap intermittently, a dance of curiosity and affection. 8 lives, once frayed and fragile, were learning the rhythm of safety, the melody of care, the simple joy of being alive in a world that had once turned its back. And in the quiet late hours, as they curled against each other, a soft symphony of breathing and warmth, I realized something profound. This journey was not just theirs, it was ours. Every cautious step, every hesitant nuzzle, every squeak of joy was a shared triumph. The storm had passed, and though scars remained invisible beneath fur and muscle, life had returned. And in the soft light of dawn, I understood that healing could be tender, relentless, and beautiful all at once. These 8 shepherds, once abandoned, were taking their first steps not only toward survival, but toward the boundless possibility of joy. The room was quiet except for the soft whimpers and occasional scuffle of paws on the floor, but beneath the calm tension simmered. Illness arrived unannounced. One puppy's breathing became shallow, another refused food, and a soft, distressed whine echoed through the room like a warning bell. I stayed kneeling among them, checking,
cleaning, comforting, murmuring in low, steady tones, hands moving with practiced gentleness. The crooked-eared shepherd curled into my chest, sensing the disruption, small body trembling with shared anxiety. The storm outside the window had long since passed, leaving a sunless gray, but inside the air seemed thick, electric, fragile with uncertainty. Every small cry pierced harder than the last. I felt my chest tighten at each gasp, each hesitant move, knowing that healing was never straightforward. Nights became long stretches of listening, holding, coaxing them through fevers, sniffles, and the tremors of fear that returned with sudden noises. A door slammed somewhere in the building, 8 pairs of ears flattened, tails tucked, bodies pressed together, a living wave of anxiety. Even in safety, the past loomed like a shadow, and I realized that rescue was not merely physical, it was emotional, painstaking, relentless work. In the chaos, personalities were amplified. The boldest shepherd paced, restless and frustrated, while the timid ones shrank further into corners, whimpers trembling on their lips. I spoke to them, slowly, softly, letting my voice thread through the storm within their tiny hearts. Every gentle stroke, every brush of a finger across a matted back, was an assertion: you are safe, you are seen, you are not alone. Slowly, some responded. A timid paw edged forward, a nose nudged a hand. Small, fragile victories appeared, tiny sparks of resilience flickering through the fear. Yet setbacks were inevitable. One puppy developed a mild fever, the crooked-eared shepherd refused to eat for a day, and I stayed awake, hand resting against its tiny chest, listening to its heartbeat, willing it to keep steady. Each minute was a battle against panic, against helplessness, against the gnawing fear that despite every effort, the storm inside could undo what we had built. And yet in the still moments between whimpers and trembles, in the soft exhale of relief after a successful sip of water, I felt the slow persistence of hope, the knowledge that even fractured, trembling lives could endure, could recover, could trust again. By evening, exhaustion settled in like a heavy fog, but the puppies had weathered the day. Their breathing slowed, their bodies curled in heaps of fur and warmth, shadows of fear still lingering, but retreating under gentle attention. I watched them sleep, heart tight with both sorrow and pride, understanding that love alone could not erase the past, but it could teach resilience. In the quiet aftermath, I realized that storms were not just outside the walls, they lived in the fragile trust, in the healing bodies, in the memories of abandonment, and weathering them together was what made recovery real, slow and profound. The morning sunlight spilled into the room like a promise, golden and forgiving, and for the first time the 8 little shepherds moved with unrestrained curiosity rather than hesitant caution. They explored their world with bold paws and wagging tails, noses twitching at every scent, ears flicking at every sound, their confidence slowly stitching together what fear had frayed. The crooked-eared shepherd ran ahead, chest out, tail wagging, discovering corners and blankets with triumphant squeaks. The timid ones followed more slowly, each small step a victory, each sniff a declaration that the world could be safe, that joy could be permitted. Weeks of careful care, patience and relentless attention had begun to pay off. Each puppy's personality was now unmistakable, the boldest, a fearless explorer, the smallest, a mischief maker, the shyest, cautious yet growing more trusting with every gentle word. Their play had become elaborate dances, weaving in and out of blankets, climbing cardboard towers, splashing in shallow water, and nudging one another with playful determination. I watched, heart full, hands ready to catch, soothe or correct, but mostly just to witness. The room no longer smelled of fear but of fur, warmth, and the faint tang of thriving life. It was time for them to meet the wider world. Families arrived slowly, carefully, meeting each puppy with awe and love. The boldest bounded toward the first family, tail a high flag of excitement, sniffing, circling, and curling into a lap with immediate trust. The timid one took longer, hiding behind blankets at first, eyes darting with uncertainty but patience. Soft voices and gentle hands coaxed it forward until it finally nuzzled a child's hand, tail wagging in small, tentative arcs. Every adoption was a mixture of joy and quiet sorrow, knowing that these lives, once abandoned, were now finding homes where love would never turn away again. The last adoption came at sunset. I sat on the floor, crooked-eared shepherd nestled against my chest, and watched as a gentle couple extended hands, soft voices speaking promises of care, walks and shared mornings. The puppy hesitated, tail low, gaze flicking between the room it had known and the unknown ahead. Then with a tiny deliberate step, it moved forward, pausing for a moment to look back, eyes meeting mine, a silent recognition passing between us, a promise that the bond we had formed would linger, that trust had been planted, that love had grown, and with that it leapt into arms willing to protect, hearts willing to nurture. The room was empty now except for quiet echoes and memories. I breathed deeply, letting the realization settle. 8 lives, once abandoned, once trembling under rain-soaked cardboard, had found family. They had learned to trust, to play, to be whole again. The sunlight outside painted the walls in gold, dust motes drifting like tiny sparks of hope. I smiled, hands still trembling from holding so much life, knowing that rescue had not been a single act, but a journey of patience, presence, and unwavering care. Even as the door closed behind the last puppy, leaving behind the quiet and warmth of an empty room, I felt the pulse of their presence lingering, tiny paw prints on my heart, indelible marks of resilience, courage, and love. And in that moment I understood fully, they were no longer forgotten. They were home, they were family, they were hope restored.